when they're actually cutting plants, that just means like a total loss of that plant. But sometimes they can just kind of take a bite, which will stunt the growth of those plants. And so ultimately, the only option once the plants are gone, right, is to replant.
It's rooted in research and proven for producers. We're taking a look at the insects impacting the Western Corn Belt right now on the AgNow Roundup. Well, good morning and welcome to the AgNow Roundup. My name is Dave Deacon. If you grow corn, you know that this is a very busy time of year, and that's why we're taking a look at some of the pressures that can impact the corn crop across the United States. Last week, we were talking about insect pressure across the Mid-South, and this week, we're heading to the Western Corn Belt to talk about insect pressures across Iowa with Iowa State University Extension's Ashley Dean. But before we get to any of that, let's take a look at the weather impacting the ag world with meteorologist Matt Makins.
All right, Matt Makins here. Just got in from Amarillo, or the Amarillo area, really technically Amarillo and then Canadian, Texas. Remember Canadian with the big fire not long ago? Was there for the Hemp Hill beef conference, and tremendous outpouring of support from the community. A lot of folks came to that conference, so thank you for having me. We discussed La Nina and sadly the drought that is coming back. Let's focus on the next week or so here for AgNow, and we're going to be looking at the potential of a frost and freeze. Notice this area right in here, this pink coloration from Denver stretching toward Minneapolis. We have some crops that may be susceptible to frost and freeze damage, and that'll be coming in this weekend. And then these blue areas, this is all severe weather risk. So I want to take a closer look at that. Perhaps you're not going to watch this video today, Thursday, but may in the next couple of days. Bear with us. Today is Thursday, and we have a severe weather risk from Kansas all the way down through Texas. Kind of two bullseyes in that, as far western Kansas and then northern Texas toward Oklahoma City. Watch the progression as we go into Friday now. The severe weather risk is going to be more for Omaha, Kansas City, Des Moines, stretching down toward Dallas. Then on into Saturday, we have severe weather focusing on Kansas City, Wichita, Oklahoma City, and those surrounding areas. But really the threat goes from Mexico through Texas all the way up into the Great Lakes. The next 3 days really critical for keeping tabs on the weather. Severe weather will include things like tornadoes, hail, damaging wind, too much rain in some cases, as we'll talk about in a moment. But what we need is that rain. I know many of us are still planting, so there may be some delays coming our way due to the rainfall, but by and large, the soils are good. They're in good shape to soak in this water coming. You're looking at soil temperatures in the shallowest layer. All of the dots on the map across the corn region are now moving into favorable temperatures for plant and obviously germination, so we're in full swing here. But I think what may delay the corn for the next couple of weeks will be the rain that we'll see coming through over the next few days. But it is well timed considering the drought we have over Iowa. Here's a current look at the root zone soil moisture. So the soil temperatures are favorable for soaking in water, and the soil moisture is also favorable for soaking in water here around Iowa, circling that area. Iowa, pretty dry soil, so they're going to soak it up like a sponge. But once you get down into Oklahoma, we have a surplus in some cases down along the river valley, down in the north parts of Texas. We have a surplus already. So unlike to the north, where that soil will soak in as much rain as possible, in parts of the central to southern plains where it has been wet, we may see too much rainfall. Sounds odd, doesn't it? But too much rainfall in some cases may lead to isolated flooding. Let's get to the nitty-gritty here. Here's a timeline. Storm motion for the next 10 days. The big cluster of storms passes through the Midwest. Another storm system develops out by Denver this weekend, Friday and Saturday. It then passes over the plains. So it's two systems through the next 3 to 4 days. Then we'll have a little bit of a break in the action early next Monday and Tuesday. A few thunderstorms get going Tuesday into Wednesday around corn areas. Central to southern plains have more rain on the way next Thursday and Friday. We're already into May at this point, and the active weather pattern does continue into early May. So it's going to be quite a haul here. We may have some windows of opportunity to do some planting early to mid parts of next week, get active again toward the weekend, and then looking toward the second or third week of May to get everything wrapped up. But we do have some weather delays coming in terms of the amount of rainfall, and of course the risk of severe weather need to be noted as well. Here's the total water that's on the way across the country. A lot of the country is going to get some valuable water this week. Again, in some cases, it may be too much. Areas down here in the Flint Hills and Osage regions may have too much on the way. Let's fly that map in. We'll start on the north side. Here's Iowa, so around Des Moines. These red colorations, that's 2.5 to 3 inches of rainfall on the way for the next 10 days. I'm not just focusing on the first storm or the second because you may not watch this until the weekend. But over the next 10 days through the 5th, we'll be looking at 2.5, 3 inches of total water across a big swath of Iowa. Down into eastern Kansas, western Missouri, those rainfall totals may go well above 4, 5 to 6 inch totals, and the same down for far northeastern Oklahoma. But a broad area here in the reds to deeper reds, that's at least 2 inches. That covers a lot of territory. So again, it comes through with some planting delays, but it is going to help the soils out immensely for those soils that need that water. Snow on the way? Well, yeah, there's that chill. I mentioned the risk of frost and freeze at the beginning of this video. That risk is not necessarily a cold, sustained risk. It's not bringing in a lot of snow, if you will, on the backside of these storm systems to move through. So total snowfall map is pretty bleak. We have a little bit of this in the upper Midwest. We have some throughout the Rockies and the high plains. But really, most of snowfall is up into Canada, and even that's not going to be very much outside of the mountainous locations. So we're running out of the cold tap, if you will, for snow events as we wrap up kind of the winter season, the snow season, and now we're just really kicking off severe weather season. Let's go through the next 4 weeks, week by week. 25th to the 2nd of May, you kind of got the idea already. It's going to be wet across a big portion of our crop country. Go to the 2nd of May to the 9th of May, and we still have favorable areas of water. It's still an active weather pattern. However, drier for parts of the delta out toward the southeast. Let's get into the 9th of May to 16th of May, and we still see favorable areas or chances of getting water for the central and southern plains. 16th of May to 23rd, still favorable in the high plains of Colorado, through Kansas, down through Texas and Oklahoma. Drier, however, in corn country into the upper Midwest. Temperatures throughout those same 4 weeks really hit and miss. We're still fighting with some cooler than normal temperatures here recently, and we'll continue to see a fluctuation of cool to warm. With an unsettled weather pattern, you can expect your temperatures to be equally unsettled. So look for cooler periods, warmer periods. It's just going to be kind of a, for lack of a better term, a bit of a turbulent turbulent end to April, start to May, on into mid-May. Good for water resources, however. That's this week's AgNow Weather Report. Matt Makins here. We'll see you next time.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. We certainly will take all the rain that we can get across this part of the country during growing season, and we appreciate all that you do for us as well here on the AgNow Roundup. Whenever it comes to insect pressures, you can find different insects in different crops in different parts of the country. Last week, we were talking with Dr. Steve Brown with the University of Tennessee about some of the insects that impact the corn crop across the Mid-South, and many of those were actually under the soil. This week, we're heading to the heart of the Western Corn Belt to learn about insects that are impacting the corn crop across Iowa with Iowa State University's Ashley Dean. First of all, thanks for going on with us. And what are some of the things that producers need to be thinking about whenever they do get into insect season with their corn crop?
Oh, that is kind of a loaded question. I think it varies by time of year. What people might be thinking about, but perhaps we can start with kind of the early season pests. And I think actually your speaker last week maybe covered some of these things, but I think as people are starting to plant and starting to think about, those seeds germinating and coming up out of the ground, some things that they should be thinking about is scouting for those pests that can impact stand establishment. So in Iowa specifically, that would be things like white grubs, wireworms, seedcorn maggot, and maybe black cutworm. And so some of these things are ones that overwinter, and maybe we can sort of expect them a little bit each year if we've had problems in the past. So like white grubs, wireworms, and seedcorn maggot are things that typically people will see as sort of persistent pests, things that they've had problems with in the past and can sort of expect. But black cutworm is one that migrates from the southern states. They like to be warmer in the winter, and so they can't survive up here in Iowa. So that's one that I encourage people to actually make sure you're going out to look for, because that's one that we don't necessarily expect. We can't really predict. And so I always encourage people to go out and check stands and see which of these insects, if any, might be impacting stand establishment.
Whenever it comes to those traveling insects, the migrate, when do you expect the flushes from the other states to kind of work their way north? What time of year?
Yeah, it's actually right now for black cutworm, and actually true armyworm as well are two that we typically monitor for in Iowa. So we just use these sticky traps that we can bait with a pheromone lure. So it mimics the sex pheromone from the female. And so the males will fly into the trap, we can catch them, and usually we can sort of predict when they might start showing up in crop fields based on those captures. So actually, we started catching some black cutworm moths. We're not trapping for true armyworm this year, but we are trapping for black cutworm. And we started catching those actually at the very beginning of April. So for almost a month now, we've seen flights of black cutworm coming into Iowa.
How do you treat for insects like that? I know that it can be impactful as the crop emerges. So is there a pre-treatment that you can do on a field?
For all of these insects, people could potentially be using like a seed treatment, which can certainly help sometimes. Usually that doesn't really help for most of these pests when they have really high populations. Usually the seed treatment isn't as effective for really high populations, but people could put down a soil applied insecticide at planting if they have the setup to do that. And usually that will help protect that seed and that seedling for a short period of time during the spring. And so I would recommend that for people who know that they have issues with like white grubs, wireworms, seedcorn maggot, things that are a little bit more predictable. I maybe wouldn't recommend that for something that's really unpredictable like black cutworm. So for black cutworm, usually we just have people do stand assessments, see if there's any indication that black cutworm has started cutting off plants at the surface. And then if so, if those larvae are still present, you could use a foliar insecticide to try to help with that.
And that's pretty important because, like you say, the cutworm actually cuts the plant off and kills or very severely limits the growth of the plant, and that can impact the yield overall.
Yes, absolutely. It can impact stand establishment. It can, when they're actually cutting plants, that just means like a total loss of that plant. But sometimes they can just kind of take a bite, which will stunt the growth of those plants. And so ultimately, the only option once the plants are gone, right, is to replant. And so that then cascades into a number of other issues agronomically that could follow. So scouting is really important for these early season pests.
Take us through the year, maybe some of the insects that producers across Iowa and the Western Corn Belt may see throughout the growing season of the corn crop.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many. Insects are always going to be in crop fields, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll rise to economic levels that we need to do something about. But there are a couple that people in Iowa routinely look out for. And one of the most common ones is corn rootworm. So corn rootworm are beetle larvae that are feeding on the corn roots. And so that's impacting nutrient and water uptake. But also, if they're consuming a majority of that root system, it makes those plants really unstable and they fall over, which is what we call lodging. And this is a pest that is persistent in Iowa. It overwinters. And if people are planting corn continuously, so really any more than just 1 year of corn, those populations can build up really, really quickly and cause significant yield losses for farmers.
Iowa is a large state, and the corn crop, planting and growing moves from the south to the north. Do you see insect pressures that may vary from one part of the state to the other?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. There usually, like you said, we're warming up a bit sooner in the southern part of the state and later in the northern part of the state. So even pests that we can see throughout the entire state, we see them at different times, usually separated by 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
Farmers in the southern part are usually looking for certain insects much sooner than folks in the north. But then there are some that, for example, Japanese beetle, that's something that I think a lot of people are very familiar with. It's a big, shiny beetle, and it's very recognizable, but actually it doesn't occur in every area of Iowa, which has surprised me a few times for some reason, even though I know this. But that's a pest that is more prominent in some of the southern counties, and especially in areas where our cities are, like Des Moines and Ames and things. But then in like Northwest Iowa, I have never seen a Japanese beetle, so people don't really worry about issues with Japanese beetle there.
That's pretty amazing that such a small insect can impact a certain part of the state. Have you seen the emergence of any insects over the past 10 years that may have not historically been there?
Oh, that's a really great question. We have seen some new soybean insect pests. I know we were talking about corn for the most part today, but we have seen some new soybean insect pests. So one in particular is called the soybean gall midge, which is really, really interesting. It's a brand new species known to science, and it's only known to occur in I think it might be 8 states now,
Wow.
7 or 8 states in the Midwest, which is very interesting. We could probably spend like a whole session on soybean gall midge. But I would say one thing that I think people have not historically thought about very much, but that I've seen a lot more in the past 3 or 4 years, and perhaps it's because we've had a lot of drought. We've had persistent drought conditions in Iowa. I've seen a ton of stink bugs.
Interesting.
And I've seen them like all season long. And stink bugs aren't new, right? We've had stink bugs forever, but I've seen them a lot more in corn and soybeans than I have in the past. And so that's something that I've been talking about a little bit with farmers. Just, watch for them, look for them. Maybe you weren't concerned about them in the past, but if populations are really high, they really can cause a lot of injury directly to the yield-bearing parts of plants, which can be quite concerning.
One of the great things about universities throughout the land-grant system, there are researchers, extension folks, always listening to the producers and trying to find out answers to their questions. What's some of the research that Iowa State is doing for the producers in the corn world?
Oh, well, the not in our lab at Iowa State. I work in Dr. Aaron Hodgson's lab, but Dr. Aaron Gassman does a lot of work for corn rootworm, and this is really directly related to many of the challenges that we have with corn rootworm. We have quite a few management options available for corn rootworm. That's the one that I told you is one that's persistent. It causes a lot of yield loss because it's consuming roots. But we have BT hybrids. So those are transgenic hybrids that express a toxin that's specific for corn rootworm. And those were effective for a really long time, but throughout much of Iowa, those BT hybrids are not working as well as they used to. So we have resistance problems. And so Dr. Gassman's lab does quite a bit of work testing for resistance, but also testing as many new products as possible to try to get answers to farmers for this pest that's really, really destructive across pretty much the whole state. And then I think of things like soybean gall midge, which is a new pest in soybeans, not corn. But we have collaborated on tons of projects to try to get an answer for this because it's a pest that just straight up kills plants. And we don't see that too often, especially in soybean in Iowa. I don't know too many pests that can just straight up kill plants. So we have been working very hard to try to find answers for that. So we've done many, many studies, product efficacy evaluations, host plant resistance studies. We're collaborating on some biological control studies, just the whole gambit, like everything you can imagine. We've tried to hit it hard to try to get answers for growers.
It sounds like producers will have a very busy early season. What are some of the things that producers need to be thinking about as the corn plant grows, maybe towards the later part of the season?
Yeah, this is one that I think is really important to touch on because farmers are so busy, right? And later in the season, once there's an ear on the plant, they're gearing up for harvest. There's a lot going on. But I think it's important to scout later in the season because it's really important to protect that ear. So if we've gotten it to the point where we've developed an ear on that plant, we've protected it so that it can, I think it's wise to spend some time trying to identify any pests that might be directly attacking the ear. This is not something that people think about too often, I don't think. And typically we only get questions about ear feeding pests after the feeding is done and the insects are gone and people are like, what happened to my ear? And usually we can sort of help narrow that down, but it's really, if you wanted to make management decisions or plan for next year or anything like that, it's really critical to be scouting before those pests enter the ear, because once they're in the ear, they're nice and protected. We can't apply an insecticide that will kill them. So really there's no rescue treatment. So I just encourage people to be looking for caterpillars. So the things I think of are like corn earworm, which can do quite a bit of feeding on a corn ear, and they get squishy and moldy and really, really gross. Fall armyworm and things like European corn borer can all directly feed on that ear. And so I just encourage people to be scouting for that later in the season. Try to control them if you need to before they actually enter the ear, because once that happens, there's really nothing we can do for that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ashley Dean with Iowa State University Extension, for going on with us and helping producers kind of take a look at some of the insect pressures in corn across the Western Corn Belt.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
And of course, thank you for watching this episode of the AgNow Roundup. If there's something on the show that you'd like to learn more about, jump over to agnowtv.com, and while you're there, sign up for our social media accounts. You can download the AgNow TV app, and you can also sign up for our AgNow email. It's all free of charge, and it's available at the redesigned agnowtv.com. From our farm to your farm, I'm Dave Deacon for AgNow.